Well, I know optimism is a moral and ethical choice you have to make, often on a daily basis.
See, optimism isn't like, oh, everything is just great, because we know everything isn't just great. There's lots of challenges in the world. There's lots of struggles in the world. There's injustice in the world. An optimist sees that and knows that and says, what can I do to make it better?
I'm optimistic because optimism and hope, I use those interchangeably, is my state of mind, not a state of the world.
We choose to be optimistic. And the best example is the half full glass or the half empty glass. It's our choice to be the way we want to be.
So what makes you optimistic, Fred?
I would say that my understanding of optimism, it's an internal state. And it's not necessarily dependent or even recognizing certain kinds of external realities. It's kind of an internal decision framework to see some hopefulness, but it probably has more to do with my inner values, goals, willingness, than it does to anything necessarily that's going on outside. So when you say what makes me optimistic, it's my stance. It's how I make meaning out of things, that there has to be some positive purpose for what the hell we're doing here on this planet.
Optimism is an expectation that good things will happen, that things will work out in the end. And some people add to that, if it hasn't worked out, it's not the end. And one of my favorite saints, a woman called Julian of Norwich, funny name for a woman, but they took men's names in those days. She lived in a little cell in the 13th century, in the middle of the Black Plague, during the middle of persecutions. And she said, all shall be well, all shall be well, all manner of things shall be well. It's lasted 700 years.
Experience makes me optimistic, Victor. If you've been around for any length of time, you must have noticed yourself that things turn out for the good a ridiculous amount of the time, more than anybody has any right to expect, and certainly more than could be justified, I think, by a pessimistic worldview. I have not led a sheltered life, very far from it, but the number of times you just fall on your feet, particularly if you're willing to follow your heart a little bit and take chances a little bit, is beyond any statistical level of reasonable. And therefore, I think you have to be an optimist.
Now, what is the case for optimism? It's important both personally and professionally. Personally, there is no stronger formula for good health than optimism. Harvard, the American military, Boston University, Brookings Institution, and a host of other organisations using large studies over decades have now concluded that the key factor in a healthy, long life, living beyond 85, is not geography, it's not genetics, it's not economic status, it's in fact optimism.
If we can have an inclusive world and a respectful world, we're going to have a very optimistic world.
What makes me optimistic, Victor, are the people.
I'm optimistic about the future because I have an unshakable belief in human ingenuity, the ability to be innovative, to be creative.
What makes me optimistic is my positive attitude towards life. I always see the world with eyes full of joy and love, and I truly believe in the power of human connection.
Optimism is probably one of the things that keeps people going.
Love makes me optimistic
love and community, whether it is a connection with the natural world, with our families and our local community, whether it is connection out in the world beyond.
Sue Barrett, what makes you an optimist?
Human ingenuity, I think, and their ability to find opportunity even in crisis. When crisis comes, it creates pressure and creates cracks. And then what happens is things start to emerge. And then those people who can see that start to adapt things. I heard a great story this morning about a guy who they do a lot of stuff for the mining sector are now making ventilators. And they're, and bringing back more regional manufacturing. So yeah, there's a lot of ingenuity, and I think human beings do find a pathway forward, and working together is one of our key strengths, I believe.
Jeff, what makes you optimistic?
Thanks, Victor. What makes me optimistic is the creativity and energy that comes from, and particularly we're seeing that now, that comes from setting aside differences of any kind, including generational differences, and the energy that's created, innovation that's created by younger generations mixing with older generations, and all sorts of people of all difference coming together around the same thing. And we've seen that now, fantastic solutions to some really challenging problems.
So, Bobby Redman, what makes you optimistic?
Yeah, as I said to you previously, Victor, I think I was born optimistic, but I also think there's a bit of a choice involved. So life's never perfect for any of us, and there are good things in everything, though. And so if we can look for the good stuff, then and try and work your way around the not so good stuff, I think that keeps you positive and sort of lends itself to optimism.
And Keith Davies, what makes you optimistic?
Well, Victor, I think a bit like Bobby, I feel I've been optimistic all my life, and I've been blessed in the sense of having had a wonderful childhood, a great career, beaut family, all of those good things. Like Bobby said also, there have been dark periods and difficulties that come our way. But it seems to me that the ability to sort of take things as they are and make the most of whatever it is and try and get the best out of things. I've sort of always tried to do that. Being able to sort of bounce back when the dark stuff does hit and continue on, that's been part of it all. I guess the experiences that I had with my family in Outback WA, with our career and so on, there were so many different experiences and most of them wonderful. I mean, with hindsight, they were all wonderful, but we know that's not exactly true. So I've been blessed in a sense that I've always felt a degree of optimism and a means of being able to cope with whatever comes along. But having said that, I've never really been totally flattened by something,
We've just finished a global study, and when we asked that open question, what makes you optimistic, of hundreds of people from 42 countries, the one that is most important is life experience.
Okay.
And there's some research out of the United States that says you actually don't hit peak optimism until you're in your late 50s or 60s.
That's interesting.
Importantly, to my old friend John Anguru, what makes you optimistic?
Oh boy, well, many things, but I think ultimately it's the long view. I think taking the long view and looking at the journey that humans have been on, and even more broadly, life on Earth has been on for millennia. There are ups and downs along the way, but the journey is ever upward. And I think there's infinite potential in all of us that gives me optimism that the journey will continue.
What makes you optimistic? And truthfully, it is people like you who make me optimistic. People who believe in themselves. people who believe in the value of human rights, people who believe in Mandela's teachings. That is what makes me optimistic. It is you.
Myself as a musician, I constantly tell myself when I go to study, you know, when I go for many hours to study, I tell myself that that I had to be creative in my own process, because that keeps me inspired too. And if I'm inspired, I'm very happy, no? And that makes me optimistic at the end, no? So for me, the connection that I make is gratitude.
Well, thanks, Victor. I think I was always optimistic in a loose way, but I saw the power, I mean, the real power of it in the township of Marysville after the bushfires of 2009. For those who don't know, the town was completely wiped out, a beautiful town. 37 people were killed. This place was a ruin. And about a year after the fires, with the approval of the local psychologists, I conducted a program voluntarily of what I call meditations for recovery. Meditations for recovery. But what I actually learned out of that experience was the people who thrived after the fires, after the disaster, were the ones who had an optimistic mindset. So I saw there the power of optimism is that it underpins our resilience, our ability to bounce back. And that for me was a life-changing lesson.
Well, I think it's just natural to my character to be optimistic, but I also find that when I'm optimistic, stuff gets done, things get achieved, and that feeds on itself, and it just makes me more and more optimistic.
Well, probably similar to Tom, I just feel like optimism breeds optimism. We've sort of just got to keep thinking that way, and then it sort of keeps going on.
And Camilla, what makes you optimistic?
Well, I chose to get in my early days into the international development work, and you can't do that work unless you're optimistic that you can make a difference and that the world can get better. Otherwise, you know, how would you even start it? And I've always been an optimist, and I've always thought that things can change, even if they look really challenging, and even in the face of challenges, if you just keep at it and put your best effort in things, they can just take a turn for the better. And that's really what's happened, at least throughout my life, and what I've seen happen in the people around me. So I will always remain an optimist.
And you're an inspiring and infectious optimist, Camilla. So the epitome of what we foster.
What makes you optimistic?
Oh, so much. The sunshine, the flowers, my family who are with me here while I'm doing this recording. People, the world, us working together. Together everyone achieves more. The opportunities out there, innovation, being surrounded by amazing people who are doing amazing things.
So in these optimism cafes and conversations, the most critical question we ask everyone is, what makes you optimistic? So Margaret, may I ask you, what makes you optimistic?
I think for me, Victor, it is inbuilt to me, I have to say. I think I'm an optimistic person anyway, and I always look at a glass half full. It's just how I operate. But I also think that it's something that happens in me, and Mary, I'm sure, will have seen examples where I get a level of dissatisfaction, and my optimism, and that's probably how I would describe it, makes me do something about it. So I tend to then want to make a change and want to look at the possibilities. And so for me, optimism is around those possibilities, looking at options, looking at solutions. And when I do get that level of dissatisfaction, it's very often that I actually step up it actually makes me step up or lean into a circumstance. And I really do look at that as being part of my makeup, and that optimism is a big part of me.
Thanks, Victor. Well, seeing your beautiful orange coat and your smiling face makes me optimistic. Seeing the faces on everyone that's come in the door always makes me optimistic. People make me optimistic, and it's people and possibility. So I love the question that you ask of people, and I was reflecting on it this morning, and possibility and opportunity always come up for me, and it comes through the lens of how do we really harness our own strengths and those of the people around us to do the work that we need to do, whatever it might be, but also have joy in it. So possibility and opportunity.
What makes you optimistic?
Hello all, it's Natalie Fung here, CFO of Yarra Valley Water. What makes me optimistic is surrounding myself with people who have a positive view of the future. Optimism is a choice. It's a choice of whether you see the world as an upside or a downside. This pandemic we are facing brings about a whole heap of new opportunities. It's not a matter of survival, it's a matter of thriving. It's not a failure, it is certainly more of a learning. And it's not a challenge, it brings about lots of opportunities. So together we can speak this positive future into existence. And to be successful as a leader today, it really is about surrounding yourself with positive voices. Even better if it's your own.
Sarah Burrows, what makes you optimistic?
Oh, so many things make me optimistic. Living in the country and the people that surround me. I moved home from Africa 8 years ago, and my husband wanted to go farming. He'd never been a farmer before, but he decided that actually that's what he'd wanted to do all his life. And I rapidly discovered I wasn't a great farmer's wife, but luckily I live in the country. There's a great university in my area, and they gave me a job. I've never had any reason not to be optimistic. If you want to make things happen, just like Nerida said, do it. And it just happens. Life is great. We're lucky to be alive every day. It's, watching the grass grow on my farm, being able to do a startup like Red 8 that means that farmers can get a better return and animals can get a better life and death. Butchers can have a better point of differentiation. Consumers can get what they want. And it's all because I'm surrounded by these very people here, these supportive, amazing friends that I've made at the SRI, and what they've done for me and my family and my husband. How could you not be optimistic?
I asked Bill George, the global guru on leadership, what makes him optimistic. And it's exactly as you say, it's being surrounded by optimistic, positive people. We've got to drink from that well every day. So Tamsin, what makes you optimistic?
Well, like Sam, I spent a bit of time thinking about this last night, and I realised that, like many of the other panellists, I've probably been optimistic all my life, but I never realised it. And I think the point in my life when I realised it was when we were working in the lab, back when I worked in the lab as a scientist, and someone said to me, how do you deal with the constant disappointment of being a scientist? And I stopped and I thought, what do you mean, constant disappointment? Well, everything you do, most of the results are negative. So you're constantly finding out what you thought was wrong. And I stopped and I thought, gosh, I've never thought about it like that. I've always thought that you do something and it then presents another challenge. And you know that wasn't the right way to go, but there's more opportunity. And so I think that was the point when I realised that everything that I look at is optimistic. So for me, finding out that wasn't an answer presents an awesome opportunity to do something else. And so really, I think the crux of mine is really getting knowledge and solving problems. And in my job now, I would say my favourite part is when a farmer rings me and says, I've got this problem. Tamsin, what am I going to do? And for me to be able to use the resources I've got, and not just my brain, but again, like Sarah said, the people around me and the network that we've got to solve those problems, and to be able to ring that farmer back and go, hey, what do you think about this? And you know, it eventually does solve their problem, that's it. That just keeps me going. So, yeah.
What makes me optimistic? Victor, for me, optimism is a way of life because I do believe that life has its ups and downs, and you know, your optimism makes you face your adversities and adversaries with a sense of, you know, purpose and equanimity. And well, I'm optimistic always that the next day will be better than this one, and that the next person I meet would be a better human being than the last that I met. So I look forward to life with a sense of wonderment. And then that's what I keep telling everybody, that you have to have a sense of wonderment, because the moment you lose that, you lose a lot of beautiful things that you can see in the world and experience it. So I'm optimistic that, well, in these times, these are hard times, and all of us are in our, you know, lockdown lives. And I think that right now, too, I'm optimistic that this gives us an opportunity to look at ourselves internally, to understand ourselves, because we all, you know, we're in a bubble. Speaking for myself and for my fraternity, we were jumping from stage to stage, traveling all the time, performing all the time, and we never really had time for ourselves to internalize the process, to understand where we came from, to understand our own thoughts, our ideas, our creativity, to allow it time to, you know, to bloom, allow time to fruition, so that there's a completeness in the process. We didn't have time for all that, and I think this has given us time. And for me, for the last 4 months, I know there was a lot of agitation and nervousness in my fraternity, because a lot of performances got cancelled, our travel engagements got cancelled, and you know, people generally thought that this put a stop to their livelihood. But in our Vedanta, in our science of life that we follow, you know, we are told that life is not merely, you know, working, consuming, and living off the frills that your profession gives you. Life is about understanding yourself, like I said, internalizing the process, having meaningful relationships, having deep relationships, and understanding what the other people are about. So I think finally we've stepped back and we've started relating to people and relating to things in the manner in which, you know, we have to. So, and this has given us that pause button, the pause time to understand ourselves and the world around us. So I'm optimistic that we'll come out better as individuals, and so we will come out as better human beings, therefore contributing to a better community, a better society, and finally a better nation. And I hope that our the leadership all over the world understands this and utilizes this time to make our world a better place to live in. Thank you.
Having worked in healthcare for the last 3 decades, I've seen hundreds of examples of patients who have overcome amazing adversities, and some who haven't, but in the process, the grace in which they've handled their disease or the situation that they're particularly in. So I really, for me, optimism is seeing the hidden potential that may exist within an individual, within an organization, within a community, and helping them to exercise that hidden potential and bring it out. So that's what I see optimism as.
What makes you an optimistic?
Well, over the past sort of seen the change, I guess. In the past 10 years, I've seen a massive shift towards multiculturalism, gender equality, as well as workplace fairness.
So what is it that makes you, Morny, optimistic?
I think I'm blessed to have parents that were optimistic. So, you know, one of the things I talk about in the book is the power of the other. And I think we can be the other for people. And helped to boost their optimism, but they were naturally positive, so it has rubbed off. But I think experiences, you know, when I've really had the courage to do something, step out of my comfort zone, it's worked. And so I have a deep faith in things working.
And we know from 6,000 years of recorded history anyway that opportunity always follows difficulty. That recession then is followed by progression, and populist upheaval is usually followed by periods of stability. Back in the Dark Ages and the Black Death in Europe, we saw the flourishing of art and science and literature and education in the period of the Renaissance. That's how history tends to go up and down, as it has for 6,000 years.
Which I think, to me, optimism is a state of mind, you know. For the same situation, one could look at it very, very optimistically and also very, very pessimistically. And I think a positive, healthy, creative mind is always optimistic, because it can think, it can create ways of being optimistic, being happy. And also, I would even extend it to the fact that to be a good leader, you've got to be optimistic. Otherwise, you can't lead anyone unless you're an optimist. And it's easy to be a pessimist. So you need a bit of courage to be an optimist, along with your creativity and healthy mind. As for me, I think I'm a born optimist. I think probably Pratibha will agree with me. Anyone of my vintage, born in India in the 60s, 70s, what we've seen then, like just to even get a cooking gas connection for your house, one had to wait for decades. I'm not exaggerating it. To get a telephone connection, perhaps 8 years or 10 years. To get a two-wheeler or a car.
As a mother of 3 teenage children, my children fill me with happiness and hope. And that's what makes me optimistic about the world around us.
I was a refugee asylum seeker who migrated to Australia at the age of 16. And so maybe perhaps I have a little bit of experience in, you know, some of my friends who came with me and myself. And I guess what I could say to the question of what makes me optimistic is that from my experience, I've just learned that, you know, it's one thing to be very practical. It's another thing to be very realistic. And it's another thing to be very positive and optimistic, because if I was to be just practical and maybe negative, I may still have been left in my home country of Zambia, where everyone told me I wouldn't amount to much. And, you know, I was raised in a family where we didn't have a lot of resources. And so if I use that as a decision to be either realistic and say, well, if nobody else around me has changed, and then maybe nothing is going to be good that's going to happen for me as well, chances I wouldn't be here living in Bali as a executive business coach running 6 companies in 5 continents. The thing that got me there, my friends, is optimism. I, lucky for me, had friends and had mentors that really believed in me a little bit more, and then basically told me I could do more, a little by little every day. And so for me, I really think that optimism really matters. And that's one of the biggest secret ingredients I've had that's led to my success.
Optimism is in my DNA, which in a way, as a First Nations person, maybe sounds a little strange, you know, in terms of, as I said, we have a lot perhaps not to be optimistic about, but then we walk in the steps of our ancestors, and so we take all of those lessons and all of those pathways, and we are still moving forward, so we have to be optimistic, and so yeah, so that's a pretty powerful, you know, that's like a pretty powerful thing. I think I've always had that, you know, feeling within. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. From where I sit, the design world and the creative world is a very optimistic space to be in, and I think that we're looking always in design at, you know, solving problems and coming up with new solutions and looking to a better future. And so I think design by its very nature is optimistic, and I feel really buoyed by that optimism in the space in which I work. So if I wasn't naturally an optimistic person, I think I would be one by virtue of where I sit now.
Yeah, taking a risk and making a design. People often quote Dyson, the vacuum cleaner guy, who said that he had 5,000 models before he arrived at success. So design, you have to be an optimist, because a pessimist
You
gets
really
run
do, and
down
you're
by
optimistic
control.
also about, sorry to interrupt, but you're
No,
optimistic
please.
also about failure. You know, I mean, failure is optimistic in and of itself. You know, you've tried and you've tested things and you've got better. So it's a continual kind of cycle, I guess, of change and optimism.
I'm an enthusiast, and to be an enthusiast, you must act enthusiastically like your good self, Victor. That's what makes me optimistic.
My values as a young person were centered around kindness, respect, and hard work, with realistic optimism to achieve my goals.
Nerida Richards, what makes you optimistic?
Well, I actually think I was probably born like this, and we've got a little scientific study here of N=2 because Pete is my brother. So out of the same family. But, you know, my dad always said to us, you can do anything you want. And I think, you know, growing up with that message, you tend to be pretty optimistic. We're also a grazing family, so there was always that, you know, the rain can't stay up there forever. It will rain. And I've just always had this attitude that, you know, if you want to do something, you probably can. I remember saying to Dad when I was a kid, I wanted some horse stables and could I build them? Like, I actually thought I could. And I remember reading a quote. It was when I just started my PhD. It was Pablo Picasso, that everything you can imagine is real. And I stuck that in. It's actually in the acknowledgements in my PhD, and it's still my favorite quote. You know, I really do think that if you want something badly enough and you work at it hard enough, then you can make stuff happen.
God, I hope Pablo Picasso is decorating the front of your PhD too. There's so many dull colours on those things.
Definitely not. I don't have it. I don't have the yeah, no, it's black.
And I'd like to still think, after 42 years of work, for me, it's always about glass half full. You know, it's always about seeing the best in people, the best in a situation. And I think if that's the approach we take to life, we'll be a long way ahead of where those that don't adopt that similar approach.
Well, I'm not conscious of always being an optimist, but remember, Victor, that I sat through 16 years in opposition, 4 elections where my party was beaten, and still waited for that final one, which we won and happily has lasted. So there must have been some optimism amongst me. Look, what makes me optimistic, I think, if you know, reflecting on it since the invitation, is that I think one of the great attributes of Australia, one of the great attributes of India, are the education services on offer. And, you know, when you think about our history, and I'm a bit of a buff, and you think about the history of the world, most things that have afflicted us globally over the centuries have been resolved by people coming forward at the moment. And, you know, I'm, you know, first person in my family to go to university. Not that my record shows that necessarily, but it was a great time. But, you know, I know stories here where families have told me that they would rather go without food to ensure their children get the best possible education. And I know from my engagement with India over more than a decade that Indians who studied Australian universities, Australian university students who come to India and study, have gone back to their respective countries. Happily, many of the Indians have come to Australia and started businesses in a whole variety of fields that have added to our society. So I suppose, I think that, you know, education are the keys to the kingdom. I think that, you know, properly played, properly encouraged, that provides me with optimism about the future, not just of the India-Australia relationship, but of each of the countries in the globe in which we live.
So I don't think there's anything that makes me optimistic. I think it's an inner stance, an inner mindset. And I think things look different when you look from that place.
What makes me optimistic at the moment is that I see more and more people understanding that we have a say in how we want to create our world. It's not something passive and we're not victims, that each one of us is responsible, accountable in the very best way, the creative way. So I'm really optimistic as more and more people understand it's up to us.
I have great optimism for the future of this country. This pandemic will end, but it's going to take a lot of hope and a lot of optimism to get us through to the other side. And this is where you all come in. All the best.
Hi, this is my sister Nanda, my dad Michael, and I'm Camilla. And what makes you optimistic?
I find the fact that there are millions of people out there who are old, young, and in the middle, who are ready to take up roles of leadership and make an impact on our world. I find that really, really inspiring.
And somewhat similarly, but with specific focus on your generation, the next generation, I feel really optimistic because I feel that the next generation is not waiting anymore. Is not thinking that they need to learn and grow more before they actually start to make a voice, to take action for themselves. You can see that in the climate marches around the world. And that makes me optimistic. I don't think we have the time to wait for your generation to come around and sort of think that maybe you need to take action. This is the time to take action now. And I see lots of young leaders coming up and making that difference. So that makes me really optimistic.
What makes me so optimistic? You know what makes me optimistic? Young people like you that are eager to make a difference, that are eager to jump in and solve the problems, whether it be pandemic, whether it be racial inequality, maybe social injustice. Because, you know, the energy and the optimism of youth, you can't replicate that. There's no substitute for enthusiasm. So thank you for your willingness to jump in and get involved.
What makes me optimistic is my sense of faith, my practice of faith, and really always remembering that we're not alone, that God is with us in all that we do, and we can find God's presence in the people around us if we're willing to be attentive to everything going around us.
I think it's a good mixture of nature and nurture for me, optimism. I seem to have been born with some genes that make me a very hopeful person, as somebody that actually looks to the future with excitement. But also the nurture part of it is that sense of confidence that has come, I think, over time. You can build up optimism over time, a confidence that things can work out. And one of the most compelling things for me about optimism is that it's a feeling that is my feeling, and that I can own as an approach and a feeling, not something that I have to wait for somebody else to create for me, or that somebody else can. I think they can knock it about occasionally, but they can't ultimately impact it. It's something I can really own. So it's a very special thing to me, optimism.
I think you've nailed it, Sally. It's not a silver lining in every dark cloud. It's knowing that things will work out in the end if you persist, and you exemplify that. Janine, what makes you optimistic?
I think a little bit like Sally was saying. I think you tend to be an optimistic person or not, glass half full, glass half empty, and maybe that's from nurture, and also working through my career with a range of extraordinary people who have achieved great things. I mean, Sally's career is fantastic example. And when you work with people who are doers, who like to get results, who love to collaborate, who like to feel engaged, I think that helps. I think the other thing is that we live in a fantastic city and state. And I think Victorians and Melburnians are fighters. You know, as many on this call would probably remember, Melbourne went through some tough times in the 80s and 90s. We had high unemployment. A lot of major headquarters were leaving to go to other capital cities. It was really tough times. And I think people just said, enough's enough. They got together, they collaborated, they identified the opportunities. And then, you know, mind you, it's 20 years later, we have an extraordinarily vibrant city. We've got great restaurants and cafes. We have live music. We have events. We have great arts and theatre. We have terrific biotechnology companies. We have great technology companies generally. And suddenly you see this whole transformation. And I think Melburnians love that. And many visitors, of course, love that. And we want to get back to that. I think something like a pandemic kind of makes you realise what you had, and we don't want to lose it. You know, it's a temporary suspension, yes, but we don't want to lose it. And so I think we're going to come out fighting. I think we're going to come out and back each other and make things happen. And so that's why I'm excited, because the opportunities are there to really reshape our city, keep all the great things, and address all the issues that we know as a city we need to address. So that's why I'm optimistic.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. So Mary, what makes you optimistic?
The glass half full, but for me that's much more learnt. I think that's learnt behaviour. And I can remember in my very first career, and I was a junior nurse, and I can remember going to my dad and telling him about a situation that I saw in the hospital, which I just thought was wrong, was unjust, was unfair. And my dad saying, well, what are you going to do about it, Missy? And that's so similar to Margie. Who am I going to be in the world? And am I going to be one of the people who keep on lobbing grenades, so to speak, as the peace worker from the outside? Or how do I grow myself as a leader so I can have a voice that changes and influences the narrative? If I don't like what I see, what am I going to do about it? So, and what makes me optimistic at the moment is at this point in time, I think we have got an opportunity to change the level of consciousness that we're working from as a human species, really, and especially in our young people. Some of our young people, they keep me optimistic because of what their innovation, actually, and what they see is possible for the world, and their intelligence. They are infinitely more intelligent than I am. And some of their willingness and their enthusiasm to be an articulate, intelligent voice for change, for positive change, that actually cares for all of humanity, not just, we're moving beyond just us, just us. So how do we care for all of humanity? So engaging with our younger leaders, I find incredibly inspiring.
Absolutely everything makes me optimistic, Victor. I think I'm just a bundle of optimism. But today, it's just knowing that the days are longer, that spring's here, that the flowers and blossom are coming out. I'm really optimistic that tomorrow's a minute and a half, 2 minutes longer. I love it.
Stephen, you're a self-declared natural optimist. What makes you optimistic?
I think I've always looked at the conditions around me, and when things are miserable and people are miserable, it can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. So I've always wanted to be a realistic optimist, actually. When things get tough, you've got to think about the brighter side of life, and I've tried to carry that in my own personal life, and certainly in the organisations I've led and worked in for the last 30 years.
You always make me optimistic, Victor, but
I want to know something else.
Absolutely. But look, I think all of the experiences I've had with various people through COVID and the resilience of people that are around, everyone's finding it tough and finding different experiences. But by and large, I think the resilience and the positivity and the way that people have really reached out to help people in this difficult time rather than sort of cocoon by and large, I think has been really, really enlightening and certainly generating a lot of optimism. So that's certainly for me at the moment. And being president of a soccer club, and
we all have this ability to respond with love, you know. And so prayer and meditation are my practices. It always brings me back to a very similar theme, and that is unconditional love dissolves, unconditional love nurtures courage, all of these things. I have a choice, and those things help to really nurture optimism and this sense of hope, and you know, owning my power.
Hope, for me, is the biggest ingredient for optimism.
There's a lot of momentum building in the renewable energy space that can change our world, and also resource recovery. So I'm really optimistic about the conversations that are going on around the world in that space.
Gabrielle, tell us, what makes you optimistic?
I think it's some of the most darkest times that has made me realize or given me faith in optimism, because it's really been in some of the darkest times in life that I've discovered the power of connecting to what makes you passionate, the power of connecting to what makes you feel alive, and using creativity to channel that and prioritize that in your life and make it come alive in your life. And it's in those times that you discover the capacity of change, and that you can have dark times and you can find new ways out of that, and that actually some of the kind of best experiences in life can come from those difficult, challenging times. And so with that capacity, how can we be optimistic?
Peter, what makes you optimistic?
Yeah, thanks, Victor. Well, it's probably a combination of a lot of things, but I think one thing that makes me optimistic is, I guess, being a conceptualizer. I would put myself in that category, and where you can, I guess, see the path forward, or see the problem you've got to solve, and you've got all these parts of the problem that are all spread out, maybe all over the world, or all over, you know, across different institutions, or whatever it is that you need to bring them together. So it's the ability in the modern day, and that increasing ability as we go through time, to be able to connect with people all over the world and in different industries much more readily, easily than we could in the past, to be able to solve, you know, the problems of research that we're trying to solve, you know, for whatever it might be it eating quality or waste management or whatever that is. So I think that the networks we have, the ability to communicate, you know, during this pandemic, you know, business didn't stop at all. We had perfect ability to touch base with everyone, and probably being a total extrovert, I maybe touched base with more people than a lot of other people did. But you know, that kept me entertained while we're in shutdown. But yeah, I think that's what keeps me going, is the need in the world for food, and the knowledge that food is something that we all love and enjoy, and you know, I play a big part in that in terms of the red meat on that plate. So yeah, that's what keeps me going.
I love that brilliant effervescence. I love what you do, Peter.
What makes me optimistic? A very good question. I like to promote creative and innovative thinking, to think outside the square, to ask what is needed to find solutions rather than what's wrong. I like to view failure or mistakes as an opportunity to learn and make progress. Trial and error life experiments.
You know, I spend a lot of time thinking about things at a macro level, particularly around climate and the environment, etc. But thinking at a micro level, which obviously informs the macro level, the thing that's making me optimistic is our staff and our people at Greening Australia. You know, there's 40 of them that have been, you know, basically in place or in lockdown for 6 months now, and they're, you know, the way that they're contributing to each other and supporting each other and still making a contribution to the community is blowing me away. It's a real privilege to actually serve them. So very optimistic about our people and what they're doing for the planet and our community.
People who make positive change.
And what makes me optimistic, there's been a lot of sort of reference to kind of collaboration and sort of humanity, but and whilst I also agree on all of what was said there, I also think technology makes me very optimistic because it empowers us to tackle global problems on a global scale, and because of course technology operates at that level, it gives us an incredible sort of outreach and an ability to really change the world on that sort of on that scale. So
good question. I also have 3 young children as well, so you know, family and the future for my family and my children and their generations to come is what I certainly believe. The work that I do today and the impact and the legacy that leaves for our future generation is what I believe in, optimism and innovation that goes with that as well.
So Amanda, this is Amanda from Malden. Hi. Amanda, what are you optimistic about?
I'm optimistic about the incredible capability people have to be resilient and to be kind. And I think that this COVID thing is really distressing, but I think the positives that will come out of it is that we will perhaps rethink the way we do things, and we'll rethink our relationships, and we will value things that we took for granted before. And so I'm optimistic that we will embrace the challenges that we've got in front of us at the moment.
That is brilliant. Thank you so much, Amanda.
You're welcome.
Yeah, see.
Empathy.
Empathy.
Yeah, I think it's a complex question. I think where society generally, particularly online, everyone's kind of geared towards pessimism. And I think if this was a forum of complaining about what was wrong with everything, you know, we might see some different numbers. I think it's really refreshing to see a group of people talking about the positive side. And I think you have to have a dose of questions. You know, it can't all be sunshine and roses, but I think people who... Costa Georgiadis, the gardening guy, he epitomises that for me, optimism. He has a glow about him and a magnetism. And I think if we can tap into that side of ourselves more through our businesses, through our relationships, through that empathy, and he has amazing empathy. I met him when he was in Albury, and it was just this old soul with a warm glow and on the front foot in a positive way. I thought, you know, everyone could learn from a guy like this. I think he encapsulates optimism. That person like Costa, I don't know if some of you may not know Costa, but he's the guy with the massive beard, the black hair. Is a real character. But yeah, I think empathy, I think having the capacity to connect with others from their point of view and reflect their needs. I think that's a big part of it for me.
Yeah, well, I'm naturally an optimistic person anyway, so that's so just generally optimistic about life.
The first question we always ask in these events is the question, what makes you optimistic? And no better person to start. Lou Conway, what makes you optimistic?
Oh, thank you, Victor. Hey, well, you know, as you can see, it is actually working with people and collaborating and just thinking, how might we? I guess it's that, you know, it's that generative question about how might we change things and what are the possibilities that we could do if we actually work well together and build community together, because our regions really need us to lean in and think differently, and our climate needs us to think differently. So it is the fact that we know we can when we actually work well together. So, and I guess I have been touched by other people's stories of optimism. You know, just this event has actually shared us all talking about what is the core, you know, what is in our wellspring that makes us want to keep working hard. So yeah, you'll see how this is actually also adds to our sense of optimism.
And your infectious optimism, Lou, just everyone catches it. Marie McCabe, what makes you optimistic?
Well, I agree with everything that's been said. And one of the things, I think optimism is a choice. And Victor, it is definitely about life experience. And I've had some extraordinary experiences in my life that I absolutely cherish. And every day I am grateful for how privileged I am to work with the people that I work with and to lead an organisation that works with people living with dementia to make a difference in the world. And that's what makes me optimistic.
Wonderful. And as you know, on our booking form, we had some room for donations. So there'll be money flowing to Dementia Australia from some of the people participating
thank
in this.
you.
So. Danielle, may I ask you what makes you optimistic?
So for me, funnily enough, it's a book. So Miraculous Abundance for me was a turning point, and understanding that I've come from the city, so I've done the tree change, and speaking purely from people in the city, I feel like the farmers aren't to question it at all. I think that in the city there's a lot of damage done by the way that we live. And so being told that there's actually a way to regenerate the soil and regenerate all the damage that we've done with our plastics, and you know, in the city we're told don't do this and don't buy plastic and recycle and do this, and there's just no optimism in that. It's very a don't society. And so to finally be told all the do's, do this with the soil, grow your veggies at home, do this, do that, is just amazing. And so our whole life now follows that regenerative agriculture pathway, and our kids are happier, we're optimistic, we have fruit and vegetables growing on our acreage now in the country, and everyone in the country has been so welcoming and embracing. And so it just makes me optimistic that we can actually help to heal the planet and hopefully put us on a different pathway and give our kids a future that is so different to what I thought was possible.
Well, I'm in COVID lockdown in Melbourne, and I think if all of our leaders could get that message from you, the do rather than the don't, God, we'd be living better, wouldn't we?
Absolutely.
Meredith Richards.
So much easier.
Pardon.
So much easier. Sorry.
Go on.
So much easier to action if you've got a do message.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah. So Lee Coleman, what makes you optimistic?
If you'd sat here and asked me that 6 months ago, it was a tough question with the background being brown, not green. So rain, look, the farmers are a group of whingers. So I'm going to break the mold and say, you know, we are actually optimists underneath. Most of us prepare for the worst and hope for the best, and it's that belief in that hope's going to turn up is purely what our optimism is driven by. I'm a sort of third generation farmer, fourth generation grazier, and I look at my parents and foreparents, and they all wanted to leave their patch of dirt in better condition than they had it, and I think that's driven by an optimistic outview that we can make it better, and that's probably, you know, everyone I see around this room is all in that same tenure of how do we leave ag and our environment and where we live in a better shape and make it better, make it more efficient, make it more sustainable. So that for me is what gets me out of bed, whether it's in my startup in Farm Simple or whether it's in my business, in my farming business. They're both driven by how do you get a better go? Not every day works out that way, but that's the objective.
Absolutely brilliant. I think you've summed it up. I think farmers have to be optimistic. So you're sowing in anticipation of rain and conditions. So no, you've nailed it.
What makes me optimistic is seeing collaboration across cities, across states, across nations, as well as collaboration between government of different sides and industry, and even individuals and organisations in solving some of the big national and global issues that we've got that's facing us right now. First and foremost is getting through this coronavirus season, particularly lockdown here in Melbourne, that is devastating so many businesses. Secondly is some of the big environmental issues facing our nation and the world, particularly waste, plastics in oceans and landfills filling up. And yes, the climate is changing. But lastly, seeing people connect the dots between waste, energy, and the environment, that we don't have to tackle one at the expense of the other, that we can work together, that we can tackle the economic issues facing the world at the same time as addressing some of the big environmental problems that are facing us.
One of the things that Tyson Yunkaporta has provoked us, Indigenous, incredible mind and heart writer and activist, really, an educator, has provoked us here at the Centre for Optimism to look at optimism 2.0, beyond words. What is optimism beyond words? And
well, I'm optimistic when I see ideas and innovations that address climate change.
Thanks, Victor. I think three factors: clean disruption and the power of exponential growth, the broad-based global response we're seeing. It's not just individuals, communities, governments at all levels, it's cities, it's towns. And the third one is the idea of tipping points. I think this is an idea that we usually associate with Earth systems, but it's also something for the financial system and social systems. And I think we're pushing on those right now.
Sam Duncan, what makes you optimistic?
Hey, Victor. Yeah, I meditated long and hard over this question, and it's funny because we had a bit of a discussion last night around this, and I realised, I guess, what makes me optimistic is kind of the same thing that drives me, and I think we had Danielle and Lee sort of talk about this as well. I mean, to me, you know, at heart, it's you know, it's climate change, it's solving that challenge. That is an existential challenge that we need to solve over the next 30 years, or else we're going to be in a lot of trouble. I mean, not necessarily us, but some other parts of the world, you know, the less developed parts of the world. But there's another piece to this. It's you know, what keeps you optimistic on that journey, right, Victor? And I think you said it there, and I think Sarah just stole the words out of my mouth. Like that is exactly it. It's the people that are driven and are doing similar things to you, maybe not in the same space, but that have these wild dreams that you look at and you think, wow, that's awesome. It just gives you energy. You just feed off it. And I think there's what makes me optimistic, which is kind of that drive in life, but there's what keeps me optimistic, which is this. So yeah, and I like the fact that you're kind of pulling all these optimistics together to sort of showcase that, because it's a great source of energy. I love it, Victor.
Well, it's what the country and the world need.
Well, I think actually the size of the challenge itself makes me somewhat optimistic.
Victor, thank you. In the context of the climate crisis we're facing at the moment, there are two things. It's the potential for the European Green Deal, which is a massive policy that's coming into play and may well influence the world in terms of reducing emissions. And then look, let's hope for a Biden win so we get the new Green Deal from the USA.
Gillian, what makes you optimistic?
Well, I'm an optimistic person anyway, but I'm optimistic that we will come up with new ideas that will really make a difference, that there'll be ideas that actually support everyone, intelligent ideas with integrity, and that we will be able to make new things happen somehow, even though it doesn't seem like that right at the moment, but I believe it will happen.
You're leading us out of the fog of pessimism, Gillian.
Hopefully.
I'm optimistic because we, as a collective, are doing our best. We have areas of uncertainty, obviously. COVID-19 is pretty scary stuff, and we don't know exactly what the future holds. But from an economic perspective, we've been through the GFC, so we can call on people that have lived through rebuild society, who know how to knuckle down and have done it before. Most importantly, we know that in six-ish months, procurement and commercial will be absolutely slammed as we strive to drive best value and practice from our commercial agreements.
That's brilliant. I love what you say there in terms of, yeah, other people have been through this, refugees, migrants, people through the GFC. I think that describes it so accurate. Michael, what makes you optimistic through the pandemic and beyond?
Well, just seeing how people respond so well and how quickly we've been able to make changes that are necessary for people to keep doing what they need to, especially in schools. Like, I'm really optimistic with how teachers have responded so well and how kids are still able to learn in a time where they can't really interact with one another. So that's been amazing.
Yeah, amazing. And Brad Delamere, what makes you optimistic through the pandemic and beyond?
Well, there's actually two things. One is, which I think a lot of people lose perspective on, is I've got my health and I feel fit and healthy. So that makes me feel optimistic, especially with what's going on at the moment. And the second one is working in the innovation space. Every situation like this leads to opportunities. So there's plenty of opportunities out there to take advantage of. So that's what keeps me going every day and optimistic.
Oh, absolutely brilliant.
I think being in Victoria, you're all aware of our lockdown here. I think what makes me optimistic is that by and large, people have done the right thing and we're pulling together as a community, which is very important. And I think going forward, we'll pull it together and we'll manage, and our economy will somehow right itself. I know there's a lot of doom and gloom about that, but I'm optimistic that everyone works hard, we'll pull through.
And then just put one thought in your mind. You will be an agent of hope and light in the world.
What makes you optimistic?
One of my strong grounds for optimism is our work at Future Voices to help younger people harbor tolerant, self-building attitudes and values of positive survival. For example, live and let live. It makes the world better for all. It helps people understand the common values of humanity, making life better for minorities and the majority alike. This is the post-COVID-19 pandemic and beyond optimism message to all. Allow me to quote Mandela's optimistic leadership knowledge. Quote, "What accounts in life is not the mere fact that we have lived. It is what difference we make to the lives of the others that will determine the significance of the life we lead."
I'm optimistic for this region because we have a beautifully diverse community. If we cultivate respect and share our stories and time, there is so much that can be accomplished.
Hello, I'm Elizabeth Camp, Head of La Trobe Shepparton Campus, and we're delighted to be supporting the 3rd Nelson Mandela Youth Leadership Summit. Congratulations to everyone involved in this event. What gives me cause for optimism is seeing the wonderful work that's happening in our Shepparton community with so many people involved in initiatives to make sure that we're all staying safe and well and connected, that people who need additional support are receiving it, and that in general no one is falling through the cracks during a very difficult and challenging time for all of us. I'm thinking of things like primary school children writing letters to some of our aged care residents who can't receive visitors and are at risk of being quite isolated. I'm thinking of wonderful community organisations like Foodlink, which connects caterers who need work with families who need help to provide meals, and so many other examples of community members taking extraordinary lengths to ensure that our collective health and well-being is as good as it can be. And I find that really inspiring, and it gives me great cause for optimism and hope in the future.
Robert Masters, the chairman of the Centre for Optimism, you must have an answer for us. What makes you optimistic?
I am an optimist, but I think that what I am finding now more than any other time is the willingness of Australians in particular to take on issues and to see them through. I think the majority of people are optimistic underneath it all, but it's coming to the fore now, and they want to see an outcome, and they want to see a better Australia. So that makes me very optimistic.
But Bobby, as we opened with, there's a lot of people having trouble online last night with people from Italy and Spain and the like. So there's countries that are feeling it a lot worse than we are in Australia. But how are you getting through the pandemic? The overflow of bad news on television. So for you, optimism is the evidence for dreams not yet realised.
The collective wisdom and the collective insights that doing activities like this and doing the festival really have, reinvigorated me. I'm an extrovert, and so I need to be with people and I need to exchange ideas. So that optimism that, yes, like spring, we're emerging out of something, and I think we're coming back into our humanity. And for me, it's looking about how humanity shapes technology. So, it's great to be able to be with like-minded people and keep pursuing these, a society we want.
That is one of the great habits of the optimist. When I asked Bill George, the author of True North, that great business book, I asked him what makes him optimistic. It was exactly the same as you. He said, being surrounded by positive people, what a blessing. And that's the guru of leadership.
Look, it's just the ability to follow passion for me. And I think we all, have passions, but often we invest in activities or people or things that aren't necessarily aligned with those passions. And for me, it comes down to, absolutely being able to, really express that passion authentically.